Thank you, Councillor Gould. That was very nice prayer. Welcome to this meeting of the Council. May I first remind you all of some of the domestic arrangements. Toilets are situated outside the meeting room opposite the stairs. Cold water, which you might all need today, is also available in the breakout area outside the meeting room. If the fire alarm should sound, please leave the meeting room by following the fire exit signs and meet on the Ipswich Town Football Club training pitch. Do not re-enter the building until you're told it's safe to do so. Please switch off all mobile phones or turn them to silent. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this room, you're also consenting to being filmed by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or for training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. Finally, can members and officers please ensure that you press the microphone for speaking and turn off when finished. Right, I'm going to move on to the agenda now, please. Members, I'm moving item 10, Capital Investment Fund Company, CIFCO Capital Limited, Business, Trading and Performance Report, 2018-19, Part 1, to further on in the agenda to be taken before item 13. All other items will remain in the same order. So we'll now move on to the main body of the meeting. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have received apologies from Councillor Maybury.
Thank you. Declaration of interest by councillors. Councillor Holt.
Yes, Chair. I'd like to declare a personal interest in Babergh Suffolk Holdings and CIFCO as I'm a director of both.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest by councillors?
Thank you. Yes, declaring interest obviously in Babergh Holdings, which was item 10. I've got no idea what it is now.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. Item 3, BC.
Chairman,
oh,
sorry, just to also include myself in that personal declaration of interest as a director of the companies.
Thank you, Councillor Hinton. Any further declarations of interest by councillors? Thank you. We'll move on to item 3 then. BC 1910, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 25th June, for accuracy only. Thank you, Councillor Gould.
For fear of being labelled a pedant, but those who have worked with me before will know that I am actually a touch pedantic. I think the minutes, it's a typo I'm sure, but on page 6, item 822, I think probably we would like to read Councillor Beer agreed with Councillor McCraw and seconded the proposal of extending the consultation period to 10 weeks. And on page 7, item 9.3, I suspect we would like it to read, Councillor Ward stated that the Housing Delivery Action Plan justified the joint, with a T on the end, local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. I think those were sensible changes. Anything else that anyone would like to have altered before we say it's an accurate set of minutes? Right, thank you. So can we have a vote for or against the minutes? For the minutes, please. Oh, sorry. Can I have a proposer for the minutes, please? To confirm the minutes. Yeah. Councillor Beer, thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Osborne, thank you. All those for the minutes, please. That's carried. Thank you. Item 4, BC 1911, announcements from the Chairman and Leader. I refer you to paper BC 1911 for noting. Please also note that the start time of the next meeting on 24 September has been moved to 6 p.m, as there's a chance that the county meeting on the same day could run over. Thank you. Councillor Ward, do you have anything to report?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As I mentioned last month, I went on a 2-day DCN study tour to Roeselare in Belgium at the end of June. Roeselare has implemented many of the recommendations in the 2013 Grimsby Review, An Alternative Future for the High Street, and we learnt how they went about this, what they have achieved and so far, and the lessons that they have learned. Just to quickly run through some of the main achievements. They've changed their library into a knowledge centre, which includes pop-up space for micro-businesses. They've converted city centre parking into in the main squares to green space with children's play areas, and they've also revitalised side streets and alleyways. They've worked with landlords to bring empty units back into use, and other empty units have been used to enable start-ups to rent space on a pop-up basis, with low rent and tax for a year, and then assistance to the venture is going to be a long-term success. Other retail successes have been the introduction of mixed-mode stores, combining retail and other experience-based activities. Also providing different uses in the daytime and evenings, and also an increase in town centre residential accommodation. They've restricted development of out-of-town retail. They've implemented a new charging policy for parking, including free 30 minutes in the city centre. They've got free Wi-Fi, a city app showing available parking, discounts and other information, and a single brand for the town. In the past 2 years, about 30 to 40 new shops have opened. Some have been short-term pop-ups, but many are permanent lettings. There has been a significant reduction in vacancy rates. They have experienced a real quantifiable increase in town centre business. And although it is a bigger town, many of the things that they have done would also work in Sudbury, and for that matter, Stowmarket too. And it has given us a lot of ideas for real projects of our own. Keeping on the High Streets theme, along with the other leaders in the county, I am disappointed that nowhere in Suffolk received future High Street funding in the first round of bidding. Some of the towns that were successful are surprising in the least. However, I remain committed to our High Streets and want to see some projects underway in Sudbury in particular soon. I'm pleased that the Vision for Prosperity work for Eye, Hadley and Needham Market has been well received by the public. It's great news that the consultation period for the Joint Local Plan Preferred Options was launched yesterday and will close at 4 p.m. on Monday 30th of September. Please encourage all of your town and parish councils and residents to get involved and have their say on the proposals. I'm also very pleased at the recent announcement that both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk have regained their 5-year housing land supplies in the recent annual position statements. This is only a draft position while a 4-week consultation is undertaken. However, the provisional number of 5.78 years, including a 5% buffer, is very encouraging. Last week saw the start of major changes to our bin collections, affecting approximately 70% of our residents. There were the inevitable teething problems, but I can report that in the first week in Babergh, out of approximately 40,000 collections last week, we only have 77 outstanding missed bins. There was a particular problem in Shotley, which was the result of an overzealous refuse collector coming for bins 2 days early, but this was completely resolved by the end of the week. Can we all reiterate the message to our residents that this will take a week or two to settle down and to report any issues in the normal way so that they can be resolved? I'm sure you'll all have seen the recent communication about free swimming for children at our leisure centres throughout the 6-week summer holiday. This is an excellent example of how we can and do get things done quickly. This was done in less than 4 weeks from the initial suggestion by the Cabinet Member for Communities through discussions with Abbeycroft Leisure to the formal announcement 2 weeks ago. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Councillor Davis, Jonathan Stevenson, Cassandra Clements, Abbeycroft Leisure and others for working so quickly to implement this. So please communicate this to all your towns and parishes so that all of our children know about it and can take advantage of it over the summer, particularly this week with the weather so hot. And finally, I've been asked to make a brief mention for two other community initiatives. There's the recently announced Active Schools programme that involves 20 schools in Babergh and Mid-Suffolk. And finally, the announcement out today about the silt storage project in Sudbury. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. So we'll move on now to item 5, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. No petitions were received. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6, questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules. The Deputy Monitoring Officer has referred question 1 to Councillor Ward, as he was a portfolio holder at the time the report was taken to Cabinet. As you see, you've got some questions. We've got 2 questions by a member of the public. Mr. Register is not here, so I shall read out the question. Question 1, Councillor Ward, from Mr. Register on behalf of Bellevue Rescue, Restore and Revive Steering Group. In accordance with local authorities' executive arrangements, meetings and access to information, England, Regulations 2012, a key decision needs to be included in the forthcoming decisions list with at least 28 clear days' notice. The current list does not include any key decision to consider funds associated with planning on the potential Bellevue proposal. Why is this key decision missing from the forthcoming decisions list? Councillor Ward, would you please respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, I'm answering this because Councillor Busby wasn't a Cabinet member at the time, but obviously I was leader at the time. At its meeting on 11th of October 2018, Cabinet approved the earmarking of funds from Babergh's portion of the 2018-19 Suffolk Business Rates Retention Pilot to support a number of proposed regeneration schemes in the district. £500,000 was earmarked to Bellevue, Hamilton Road and the wider Sudbury Town Centre development. Some of this money will be used to support the planning application for our proposed hotel and restaurant at Bellevue. This Cabinet item first appeared on the forthcoming decisions list on 30th of August 2018, reference CAB 82. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. There was a second question, so likewise I'll read out question 2. Councillor Ward, from Mr. Register, on behalf of Bellevue Rescue, Restore and Revive Steering Group. And the question is as follows. Please can you confirm that the costs for the Bellevue proposal have been assessed under the key decisions requirements as per Part 1, 12.7.1 in the Constitution? And what was the result of the assessment? Councillor Ward, please respond. Yes.
Reading the Constitution, I think that should be corrected to 12.9.1 because the Constitution was revised and that's the section on key decisions.
Chairman,
That's been noted, thank you.
that was the first thing I was going to say. Yes, the revised Constitution has it as 12.9.1. Unfortunately, the forthcoming decisions list document needs to be updated to bring it in line with the Constitution. That will happen. However, there's a substantive answer now. I can confirm that the costs for our proposed hotel and restaurant were assessed under the key decisions requirements as per Part 1, 12.9.1 of the Constitution, and this assessment was part of the evidence debated and approved by Cabinet on the 12th of July 2018. This was item 16 on the published agenda for that meeting and was discussed in confidential session. This Cabinet item first appeared on the forthcoming decisions list on the 3rd of April 2018, reference CAB 36. It was then debated and approved by Council at the meeting held on the 25th of September 2018. This was item 15 on the published agenda for that meeting and again was discussed in confidential session. The minutes remain confidential and so I cannot provide full details of the assessment, but I can confirm that based on the assessment, A, Council approved the development and its capital funding, and B, the anticipated revenue effects over the initial 25-year lease will provide a net income to the Council every year from year 2 onwards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. We'll now move on to item 7. Item 7, questions by councillors in accordance with council procedure rules.
Thank you. There were none received. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to 8, BC 1912, Overview and Scrutiny Committee Report. I would like to invite Councillor McCraw to introduce his report, which is for noting.
Thank you, Chair. I've been instructed to keep this short, and you'll note there's only 2 pages for once. And fundamentally, the 2 meetings that the paper refers to in BC 1912, the first of those on the 24th of June, just dealt with the initial meeting for the Babergh Committee. We discussed an update on the CFPS Scrutiny Symposium. The government have relaunched their statutory guidance on overview and scrutiny in local authorities. We examined this. It was only released that day, and I'm pleased to report that officers and myself and my colleague at Suffolk found that our current practice was actually completely in line with the most up-to-date and recent government thinking. They also published an updated version on the same day of the Good Scrutiny Guide. That's worth attention for anybody, and it's available as a download from the CFPS on their website or from officers for members of the council. We also looked at our work plan and our timetable. That is a developing process based upon previous years' agreements of what work would be carried forward. The meeting held on the 1st of July dealt with the Capital Investment Fund Company as its major item of basis. Since that forms one of the reports in today's paper, we have requested in our recommendations that our minutes be added to this report, so you have those minutes before you. It's really just the idea that we asked extensive questions. You may wish to follow up on those, but it might help avoid a certain amount of repetition that we do get in process of looking at CIFCO. I'm happy to take questions on the paper, but obviously anything relating to CIFCO would probably be best kept for that part of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask Councillor McCraw? No? Right, we'll move on to item 9. Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Item 9, BC 1913, Equality and Diversity Policy. I'd like to invite Councillor Ward to introduce the paper and to move the recommendation in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I present to you an equality and diversity policy which demonstrates the Council's commitment to embedding the Equality Act 2010, which includes a public sector equality duty for the right of individuals to be treated equally and fairly. The Equality Act 2010 brought together over 116 separate pieces of legislation into one single act, providing a legal framework to protect the rights of individuals in advancing equality of opportunity for all. Since the introduction of the Act, there have been many changes to the legislation, and functional and supportive guidance has been provided to public authorities. It is therefore timely to bring in a policy to support and provide guidance, including duties and responsibilities in respect to the 9 protected characteristics, and to cement the way in which we are carrying out our duties in line with the Act. As a Council, we have agreed that using equality impact assessments is the most effective way to demonstrate that we have paid due regard. These are completed alongside a screening process for our major decisions and identify that impacts of any proposed changes have been considered according to the protected characteristics. Our communities are becoming more diverse, and we support and foster good relations between protected groups. It is important that our policies and service delivery reflect both these diverse and sometimes similar needs. This also includes our workforce and our commitment to ensuring all officers feel included and play their part in making the Council great places to live, work and visit. This equality and diversity policy is an overarching document that embeds best practice of equality and diversity and is supported by guidance and resource. This topic will continue to evolve, and Council are asked to recommend to Cabinet the approval of this policy to demonstrate our commitment to support and promote the diversity of our communities in accordance with the Act. I therefore propose the recommendation in paragraph 3 of the report that full Council discusses the equality and diversity policy provided in Appendix A and recommends to Cabinet that it be adopted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. May I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor. Right, this is now open for questions and debate.
Thank you. Page 19, 1.2, we list a whole list of characteristics that we should be careful not to discriminate against. The one thing we miss is politics.
Excuse me, Madam
Councillor
Chair,
Ward, did you want
but I
to
think that's,
come back on this at all?
I think that's
Or-
a valid point, because I do know that in some areas of our economy, people feel intimidated to express their political views.
I suppose, Councillor Busby, that's an interesting addition. Certainly, we do not discriminate against politics of any sort in this chamber. We are a diverse chamber, and we enjoy healthy debate. We could probably consider adding that, but interesting.
Our Chief Executive would like to comment.
If I can perhaps assist and try and avoid a comedy moment, you will undoubtedly be aware that, unfortunately for yourselves as politicians, you are not a protected characteristic within the law. I'm sure government might wish to consider making politicians a protected characteristic, but at the moment you're not, and that's why politics is not listed, albeit I take the point that you were looking beyond simply politicians in that regard.
That gives us something to consider. Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I just find it a little bit strange that we're talking about equality and diversity, and yet we're talking about certain characteristics, protected characteristics, and those who aren't in that protected characteristic presumably can be discriminated against and generally abused as much as is necessary. Surely the very nature of being something that's equal means that everybody is included and not just certain groups.
Councillor McCraw.
I'd refer Councillor Hinton to 1.3. We will not treat anyone less favourably than any other. I think that answers his point.
Madam Chairman, if I can come back and just say that the further part of that sentence does say on the grounds of any protected characteristic. So it's discriminating against different characteristics straight away.
Madam Chair, just to answer, I think there's a degree of hair splitting here.
Any more hair splitting to be done?
Sorry, Chair, but
Councillor Busby.
there is a point. If you make a list of items that you've got to be protected under, then that will not necessarily cover every eventuality. Surely the point of 1.3, that we will not treat anyone less favourably than any other, is sufficient. That should cover every eventuality. Why do we have to lift them all? I mean, you know...
Councillor Ward.
Yeah, I think we can argue forever over whether they should be listed or what should be in the list. But one quick point I do wish to add is that since the agenda pack was published, that list has been expanded with more detail of definitions of what each of those characteristics are as a result of a request and feedback from Councillor Maybury. And I don't know, presumably we'll be able to get that updated list provided to members. But we've got a list, and we have to live with it.
So it appears that that list is going to be passed to us with an expanded detail. Are we ready now to go to the vote? Unless there's anyone... Oh, sorry, our Chief Executive wants to say.
Thank you, Chairman. You'll have noticed, members, that the report is there for your consideration and then passed forward to Cabinet. Given the sense of the room, what I would suggest is that it's passed forward to Cabinet and that Cabinet explores whether it's possible to broaden beyond just those protected characteristics before Cabinet adopts the policy.
Well, I've been refraining from saying anything but I'd hate people to think the mood of the room is all against this. The reasons there are protected characteristics for some people is because they're regarded as more vulnerable than other people. And if we don't accept that, if we don't accept that some people aren't more vulnerable than others, then there's no point having this whole policy.
Councillor Granger-Howard.
To echo your point, I think those characteristics are really important because the obviously general feel of this room, to echo Arthur's comment, is that perhaps we don't understand those characteristics, and that is all the more important is that those lists are there for people that don't understand the varying people that we are nowadays. So I like the list as it is.
Councillor McCraw.
That's just, again, the point of that list is that these are groups that have, in the past, previously been discriminated against. That's the whole point of the legislation. We have to report according to the legislation. So I'm arguing for groups that we have not yet identified as having been discriminated against. We may be moving faster than we need to. For the moment, this is a list that describes the worst of what happened in the past, okay? We want to avoid those mistakes.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I just wanted to say we are perhaps entering into a slightly unnecessary debate because we are following the Equality Act. And if it's stipulated in the Equality Act, then that is what we must do. And I don't really think we need to go beyond the Equality Act because I think the groups that we need to be concerned about are covered adequately by this policy that we're about to approve. So I'm happy with it as it stands.
Any more comments or any more questions? Councillor Ward, is there anything else you wanted to add? Thank you. So I think if we're ready, I think we can go to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. There was some confusion when the list of appointees to external bodies was published a while ago. I just want to clarify that for the Western Suffolk Community Safety Partnership, there are two members appointed, Councillor McLaren and Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I do need a seconder for this, please. Thank you, Councillor Newman. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. Item 12, motions on notice. I would like to invite Councillor Malvesi to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to brief Council on some background information before I lay the motion before them. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that we have 12 years to make the necessary changes to limit a rise in global temperatures to 1.5 centigrade. Failure to act will see a marked increase in sea levels and flooding. Extreme and abrupt changes to weather patterns, which we're experiencing, crop failures, extinctions of plant, insect, animal species, and global economic disruption and crisis. Total populations of mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles have declined globally by 60% since 1970, and all of the 20 warmest years on record have occurred in the past 22 years. Failure to take immediate action and decisive action on this will detrimentally impact on the well-being of the people of Babergh District and billions of people around the world, because no man is an island. At the global climate talks in Poland last December, the UK, along with over 200 nations, agreed action on climate change with a much greater role strongly implied for local and regional authorities in assisting governments to achieve their carbon emission savings. So far, 85 local and regional authorities have passed climate emergency motions in a bid to spur urgent action to reduce their carbon footprint and to promote sustainable urban environments and economies. In passing and following through on this motion, we can take a step forward in tackling climate change and conservation as a local authority. Tackling climate change cannot just be left to national government. It is everyone's duty to do what they can to stop this existential threat to our planet. Now, the action that I would like to see as the portfolio holder moving forward is that this council therefore resolves to support the Environmental Sustainability Task Force to consider the following actions. Commission an environmental audit which identifies pollution hotspots, wildlife biodiversity and environmental health issues, an urban impact assessment with an aim to identify areas of improvement across the district, consult expert opinions in the field as appropriate, collaborate with regional and neighbouring local authorities as well as communities to encourage practical measures to reduce emissions, reduce carbon footprints and develop community-based renewable energy projects. Encourage all sectors of the economy across the borough to take steps to reduce waste and become carbon neutral. Develop a roadmap for Babergh District Council to go carbon neutral by 2030. Report to Cabinet and full Council within 6 months of the task force starting with an action plan setting out conservation and environmental sustainability goals to address the targets by 2030, incorporating proposals on the investment implications of this proposed activity. Write to the Minister of State for Energy and Clean Growth requesting that national policy is urgently developed to reflect the seriousness of the current emergency and to release funds to authorities, encouraging them to take the necessary measures at local levels. So the motion I put forward before Council is 1. Acknowledge a climate emergency. 2. Set up a task force commencing by September 2019 to examine ways in which Babergh and Mid-Suffolk councils will respond to the climate change challenge on a spend-to-save basis, with the ambition to make Babergh and Mid-Suffolk councils carbon neutral by 2030. To work with partners across the county and region, including local enterprise partnership, public sector leaders, towards the aspiration of making the county of Suffolk carbon neutral by 2030. To work with government to A, deliver its 25-year environment plan, and B, increase the powers and resources available to local authorities in order to make the target of 2030 easier to achieve. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mabuse. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ward, thank you. So now we can move to questions and debate. Councillor Hardacre.
Well, I'd like to propose an amendment. I don't know if everyone's got the briefing paper that was handed out that's got the wording slightly highlighted. First of all, I'd like to say I welcome this motion. I would have put one in myself had it not gone in, and we'll be voting for it in any case. And the purpose of this amendment is not to, it's to hopefully work in a collaborative manner to try and beef it up a little bit. So, as we'll notice, I'm going to suggest we insert a second point, which is a standalone point in the motion to declare a goal to make the council carbon neutral by 2030. in the existing second point, it mentions ambition. It does say target later on, but I think having it as a clear bullet point is a more of a statement of intent up front that we could try and meet. I also propose, so item 2 becomes item 3, and I've completely reworded this to read, request that in 2019, a Cabinet member for the Environment convenes a working group of citizens selected to reflect the range of demographics in the district. This group would meet to consider the climate change impact of each area of the Council's activities and, in consultation with scientific and expert advisors, produce a set of recommendations for ways to bring each of these areas to zero by 2030. Task force, working group, you can call it anything you want. The key here is to get members of the public involved from the get-go, rather than the usual suspects, so we say, us in this room, in this building meeting, and then putting recommendations to the people in some kind of consultation. We get them involved from the start. And there is precedence for this in Camden. They've recently done this exercise. They met for 3 days. They got 50 local people. They've got some experts, and they produced recommendations this weekend just gone. Oxford are doing a similar process, a citizens' assembly they've called it, with 50 people again, and they are meeting in September for 2 weekends. So there is precedent for this. Those are more urban councils, we're more rural, but maybe we could be the first more rural council to do that. Item 3, I've slightly reworded to include the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership in that list, and also that we should implement the recommendations of the working group. So not a great deal of change, just a little bit more, beefing it up, making it more clearer what our goal is, to include the public from the get-go and bring those recommendations outwards into the wider county. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hardacre. Can we have a seconder, please? Thank you. Did you want to speak?
Yeah, just briefly. Just like to echo Rick's words in saying by setting recommendations and goals rather than aspirations and ambitions, we're sort of setting ourselves targets we can actually meet, and rather than leaving some of these things a bit loose.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Councillor Malvesi, do you accept this amendment?
Madam Chairman, no, I don't. And I don't for the following reasons. We are going to set up a task force. We say in our motion that we are working with our partners, and the Suffolk Climate Change Partnership is in fact one of our partners already. So it's just producing a longer list, whereas I prefer to be more direct and to the point and get the job done. A citizens panel, we were elected to be that panel. We have been elected to be the voice of the people. That they should be included at some stage, absolutely. But I don't think that it's at this stage in the motion that they should be included. This is a motion to basically commit the council to recognising climate change and doing something about it. I've said in the action points that we will come back to council within 6 months with our plan, how it's going to actually succeed. And I think that it's at that point that we involve people, because it's at that point we will have set out the terms of reference for the task force, which is critical to its success. Because if we don't have terms of reference to a task force, it just becomes a nebulous non-entity. So it's critical that we get those terms of reference finalised, and they will come back to council for approval, I think, yes? Our colleague, Councillor McGraw, will go through them with a fine-tooth comb. So on that basis, I think that there is no need for your amendment at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Malvesi. Right, so we're going to open to questions and debate on the amendment. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Councillor Malvesi has said. And we use words such as ambition and aspiration simply because we all know that the 2030 date is going to be very, very difficult to achieve. The government has set a 2050 date, but we are setting ourselves a challenge, and therefore we need to rise to that challenge, but it has to be an ambition and a very bold one. But more importantly, a citizens' panel. They tend to be stuffed with activists and zealots and not end up representative at all. As Councillor Malvisi has stated, we are the elected representatives. We live in a representative democracy. And indeed, we have a very fresh mandate. We were only elected a few weeks ago. Therefore, it is beholden upon us as the councillors here to form a task group and to do this work ourselves on behalf of our electors. And also, of course, as Councillor Malvisi said, we will consult where appropriate, where necessary, but it is our responsibility. To not do this will be shirking that responsibility.
Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to correct the impression that Councillor Ward says it'll be a citizens' panel, as you've called it. We've not called it a citizens' panel. We just said, I think, a group of citizens selected to reflect the range of demographics in the district. So we're not asking, it's not going to be self-selecting. We're not saying all the activists come forward, whoever wants to. The way this works in the cases that Rick cited, it's almost like a jury system. You look at the electoral register and you select people based on, and actually you pay them for coming, so they're not, it's not self-selecting even by the ones who can afford to come to give up a weekend will come. You provide a small token so that they can afford to come. And that's the exciting thing about this way of doing things, is that you are genuinely involving a proper cross-section of our citizens in Babergh, not just... So there might be people on there who think that climate change is a load of rubbish, you know. Equally, there'll be people with, you know, degrees in climate change, possibly. But everyone gets a chance to think of ideas, because a task force of a few councillors, yes, we've all been elected, but it will just be a self-selected group of councillors on this task force, won't be able to come up with everything. There's so much that needs to be done. It's a sea change in policies we're talking about, that I think we need that added input. Now, I hear what you're saying, that you can... you're not ruling out that idea, hopefully, because I hope that if this amendment falls, that we can still look to do that as part, somehow, to report back to a task force or whatever in some other way. But I really hope it does, this idea, even if this amendment falls, does get taken on board as we go forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dawson.
Yes, one of the things I would actually comment on this is actually slightly inflammatory. Having discussed, with a lot of experts in this field, to suggest it's in a climate emergency, because actually many consider this slightly ill-judged and associate it with sometimes extremism. When we look at nationally, the mechanics are in place at a national level to deal with climate change. The committee actually does that, and they've set their carbon budgets to reduce all emissions. That's already done. So we're definitely already on the pathway to decarbonisation. And one of the problems with this, which slightly may concern me, is the fact that if we go faster in Suffolk, we can actually damage the economy or damage the lives of hard-working people who actually want to go to work, or go to hospital. So I think going faster can actually end up with exporting emissions and therefore increasing global emissions, because some of these are going to countries where they don't actually effectively deal with them as well as we do here.
So are we talking to the main motion now or the amendment?
Councillor Lindsay.
We're talking to the amendment.
We're talking to the amendment, yes.
So the words emergency are in the main motion that Councillor Malvisi is proposing.
Yeah.
So you're objecting to the main motion?
No, I'm making comments.
We need to stick to the main, to the amendment at this time. Okay,
Yes, but I've actually gone on to say the point of this is the fact that if we're going faster, this is what concerns me. Do you want me to repeat it?
I think that's in the main...
Yes, but it's appropriate to this as
but
well.
We can come to that in the next stage. Councillor Fraser, did you want to say anything? You had your hand up earlier. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just picking up on what Councillor Lindsay was saying there, correct me if I picked this up wrong, please. You're saying that we'd be selecting members from the public from the electoral roll and offer them rewards to actually come along on a Saturday to actually act as a working group or something to look at this climate emergency. I think that would be unworkable because the turnout at elections are low enough in the 30%, but to ask residents to give up their weekends, I think it would be an even lower turnout. So I think for that idea, it would be a low take-up and very ineffective, so I think unworkable.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCraw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really never quite certain whether it's Madam Chairman. I know you always said you wanted to be called Chairman, but just, you know, so I might vary my terminology at different times. I'm not entirely happy, I don't think many members are going to be entirely happy about being described as the usual suspects, because to be honest with you, I think we're a pretty unusual bunch of suspects. One of the great things I think about Babergh in its past, and particularly in its present, is the range and diversity of opinion, with 5 separate political groups. Now, it's not been discussed how the task force might be made up. I have some ideas upon that, and I'd like to see representatives from each of the political groups. Because again, I think the residents of Babergh are going to ask themselves a question, well, why are you press-ganging us into this, even if it's only 30% of us turn up, when fundamentally we elected you to do this? I mean, isn't this part of your job? And I'd have to say, and I'm incredible sympathy with the Green approach here, but you have a mandate to do just what you got elected for. That's you to do that. That's what the people who elected and the people who voted Green across the district, they expected you to do that. Now, Green issues are now no longer the exclusive right of one particular political party. Every single one of us has a Green agenda to some degree or other. Now, you can vary the amount of it, how high up our agendas it might be, but the very point that this motion has come forward on is the fact that it's now on everybody's agenda. That's a success for Green politics. It's now a national, international issue, and yes, it's difficult to get other countries to come in. Fundamentally, we're arguing about the terms. I mean, frankly, whether we have it as a target, an ambition, or a goal, these are all synonyms for the same word. This is what we want to do, or going to try and do. So fundamentally, I think I have to speak against the amendment because I'm not particularly happy about Citizens' Assembly. It didn't work too well for the Russian Revolution or for the French Revolution, and I'm not wearing a cockade or anything like that. Let's just say that the motion as it stands is sufficient unto the purpose. However, it's a starting point anyway, and it's what we do after that starting point. The other thing I'd say is that I don't know how long it would take to organise as a Citizens' Assembly, but I can't imagine it's going to happen overnight. That's all, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Does anyone else want to debate the amendment? Councillor Busby.
I'd like to ask them a question. This has already been done in other areas, presumably, you mentioned it, so it can't be that difficult. I'd like to know, maybe not now, but I'd like to know what the outcome of those meetings was and how successful they were. Perhaps you could just enlighten us a bit more.
Councillor Hardacre, did you want to make a comment on this?
Briefly. I mean, in terms of time, I don't know how long it took to set up, but the Oxford vote was a couple of months ago in their meeting in September. The Camden group has already met and done it. It was 3 days, a week apart or something. And they've come up with a set of recommendations, 17 recommendations, if you like. I don't know the precise details, but it is across travel, installing solar power, transport, waste disposal and things. So, it was a relatively fast process, and yeah, it came out with a set of recommendations, which then went to the council. So.
Thank you. Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I can just answer a couple of points that have been raised. It concerns me that somebody is using an electoral role to write to people to join, whether it's a task force or a working group or a citizens panel, it doesn't matter. But I'd have to get confirmation that under GDPR you can do that. And I wouldn't want to expose the council to that because, as I said previously, and it's been supported by Councillor McGraw, we are the elected representatives, so we have the mandate. But whether we have the mandate to use the electoral roll for what is essentially our job, I'm not too sure. Paying citizens to attend. As a parish councillor, I can tell you that our parish council would not be happy to hear that we had paid for people to attend a citizens panel when it's our job anyhow. And to come back, and Councillor McGraw touched on it, the task force, we have yet to put together and finalise the terms of reference, and they are key. They really are key. And I've already made it known to my opposite number in Mid-Suffolk that yes, we want somebody from right across the council to be part of that task force. But in order to channel and focus the purpose of that task force, the terms of reference have got to be pretty tight. Thank you.
Yes.
Chair, I'd just like to clarify that tonight Council are commenting and can commit to pledge to this motion, but actually it's a Cabinet function, so it will be for Cabinet to decide the terms of reference for the task force if you were to agree it. Thank you.
Councillor Cresswell, thank you.
I agree with everyone around this table has been duly elected, but we have been elected to do what the public want, so that's how I feel about it.
Thank you. Any more comments? Are we ready to go to a vote on the amendment?
Yes, I think so.
Right, I think we're ready to go to a vote on the amendment now. Can we have those in favour of the amendment, please?
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that was 4. Those against.
4 for the amendment. Can we now vote against the amendment, please?
That's lost. That's lost without me.
The amendment is lost. So now we'll return to the Oh, okay, sorry, abstentions. Any abstentions? No, there are no abstentions. So now we'll return to the substantive motion, please. Councillor Malvisi, did you want to say anything further about your substantive motion?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've laid the motion in front of Council, and I'd be grateful if we could now move to a vote to accept.
I think Councillor Davies wants to say something, but shortly we will. Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important that we do have a little debate before we go straight to the vote. There's a question, actually. In the motion, it says Babergh and Mid-Suffolk. Are we able to make a decision on Mid-Suffolk's behalf? We are two separate sovereign councils, and I appreciate it is going to Cabinet as well. That's my first point. The second point is I'm fully supportive of the motion. I think it's important that we do act. And the terms emergency or whatever else, we definitely have a climate issue worldwide, not just in this country. So it's important that we, as a council, play our part in doing whatever we can to help in that. I'm a big believer in that. I thought Councillor Gould's pre-meeting prayer was very, very good and very succinct and very relevant to this, because we are caretakers of this planet, and it's important that we act to preserve it, not just for ourselves, but for future generations as well. I'm a big believer in harnessing the beauty and the power that we have. And that's why one of the things I'd like us to start doing, and I know not everyone agrees with me, is to start using or exploring the option of hydropower, tidal power, call it what you want, but to use the natural resources that the earth has given us in terms of the power from the North Sea for us, but worldwide as well. So I fully endorse and I will be voting in favour of this motion.
Chair, just to clarify, of course, as a sovereign council, you can only vote for matters that reflect or are in Babergh. But, of course, it's subjective because this motion is going to Mid-Suffolk on Thursday evening as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Lindsay.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, I support this motion, despite the fact the amendment fell. I still think it would be churlish to reject this just because my amendment fell, or our amendment fell. It's massively important. I just wanted to say that I really think we do have to be aware of what this does mean, what we're committing to, because it means that I feel, every single policy of the council that we decide on, whether it be Cabinet or the full council, has to be scrutinised to see whether it moves towards the goal of reducing carbon or it actually increases carbon. And some of the policies that we already have in place, and I had a discussion earlier at the leaders' meeting with Councillor Ward about this, proposing we're in support of the Sudbury bypass deal. We're supporting the Ipswich Northern bypass. We really do have to look at the research on that and get a clear view, because the evidence is that if you keep building roads, you're encouraging more people onto the roads, more transport. And it's not good enough to say that electric cars that's okay, in a few years' time it'll all be electric, so there's no emissions. There's an article here from the New Scientist just in March, headlined, "Electric cars won't shrink emissions enough. We must cut travel too." And they quote Kevin Anderson of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, one of the leading bodies on climate change, who says that it's not enough. If we try and electrify the current fleet, decarbonise the current car fleet, it's not going to be fast enough to meet the goals of zero carbon by 2030. We must reduce the demand for transport as well. That means not building more road space, but actually allowing more space in places like Sudbury for public transport, for buses, for cyclists, for walkers. Not having perhaps so many car parks. I think that's all I've got to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindsay. Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And point of clarity to Councillor Lindsay. You just said that we support the Sudbury bypass, which I do. I wasn't aware you did. Will you clarify that? And the Northern bypass at Ipswich, which again I support. Do you? You're saying you did. Can you please clarify whether you are supporting the Sudbury bypass and the Ipswich Northern bypass, which is what you just referred that you were? You said we.
Councillor Lindsay.
Yes, I'm sorry you misunderstood. By we, I'm referring to the Vision for Sudbury, which is produced, I presume, by a council body. So by we, I'm referring to Babergh Council as a whole body. Me personally, I completely don't support the Sudbury bypass, nor do I support the Ipswich Northern bypass.
Yes, Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I thoroughly commend Councillor Lindsay's sentiment, but I don't think it is within the Council's remit to demand that every business in this country changes its business model. That will take time, because it's only by changing the business model that you're going to get true, effective, absolute change. Because most businesses rely on you buying a new TV every 3 years, a new fridge every 4 or 5, a new washing machine every 5. So do we change those business models? How do we influence that? We can't influence that. So the motion here is asking you to acknowledge that we have an issue and to accept it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further comment? Councillor McCraw.
Just to say, I think we're already preempting the work of the task force. Perhaps we should vote.
Councillor Malvisi, is there anything finally you'd like to say? Because I think we're ready now to move the motion.
No, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. So we're now voting on really pledging that the Cabinet can go on to look into this. So can we have a vote for those in favour of the motion, please?
That's unanimous. Yeah.
I think that's unanimous. That's unanimous. Thank you. So now we're going on to item 10. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right.
BC 1914, Capital Investment Fund Company, CIFCO Capital Limited, Business Trading and Performance Report 2018-19. Before we commence, can I ask members to ensure that they refrain from asking any questions that relate to any information that is in the exempt papers until the meeting moves into the closed session. It is also my intention to move the recommendation and vote on them in an open session. Therefore, there may be a need to move from open to closed session and then back again. Thank you. I would like to invite Councillor Busby, Vice Chair, BDC, Suffolk Holdings Limited, to introduce paper BC 1914 and to move the recommendation 3.1 in the report. Councillor Busby.
This report sets out CIFCO Capital Limited's trading activity in 2018-19. It reports performance against key performance indicators that were set in the previous year's business plan. The report confirms that the first tranche of investment was completed in March 2019, creating a portfolio which delivers a net initial yield of 5.75%. Appended to the report in Confidential Appendix A is the draft business plan for 2019-20. The business plan has been prepared by the board of CIFCO in consultation with its fund managers, Jones Lang LaSalle. It has been approved by the council holding companies and endorsed by the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The business plan forms an important part of the governance of the company. I would therefore like to propose that the recommendations set out in section 3 of this report are approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Busby. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Holt. Right, questions and debate.
Yes, it is. Not really so much of a question as just a clarification. I actually asked the question before the meeting started, and I'd be surprised if I was the only person who misunderstood what it said on page 32, 10.5. In that paragraph, it talks about the total annual rent at 3,119,558 against the previously anticipated rental income 2.8 million. This includes income from the first asset acquisition of the second phase of investment, and then it says including this, the income the first phase of investment generates is 2.98. Right. That doesn't actually read particularly well, so I did seek a bit of clarification, and the important thing is that last sentence starts with a this, which refers to the 3,119,000, not to the 2.8 million underneath. Did everybody understand that before I explained it?
Yes. Well, I understand it now.
So it's just to clarify that.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. Did you want to comment on that at all, Councillor Busby, or you're happy with that explanation?
No, I think it's best left as well.
Any further questions or statements or queries? Do we need to go into closed session, or? Councillor McCraw.
Madam Chair, if we've completed our coverage of the initial part of the report, I propose we move to part 2, and then we can discuss the whole report and the business plan.
Okay, just a moment. We'll. Have you got a question?
Yeah, just before we do that, Madam Chair, I wouldn't mind some clarification if possible. Reading through the report, I'm struggling to see what it is within the confidential paper that is confidential, if I'm being honest. I'm struggling to see if there's any information in here that wouldn't ordinarily be gained from a view of Companies House website. So could we have some clarification on why we should be excluding the public from this session?
Emily, could you answer that, please?
Hello. The reason the business plan is on the closed agenda is because it does detail the operation of the business of CIFCO, so I think it would be unusual for a business plan to be in full public detail in any other situation. But specifically, I think the confidentiality relates to details regarding the tenants, so any lease expiries that may come up. We wouldn't want that information to be public information because it may lead to those that tenant space being targeted when the expiries come up. So it's more about protecting the CIFCO business and that lease data. I'm happy for discussion in relation to the business plan to be on the open agenda, as long as it doesn't deal with any of those tenant-specific items.
It's for them to decide now, actually. So, do they want to go into closed
Right.
session?
So, yes, Councillor
Question on that, which is if it's about identifying the tenant. In the open paper, we've got a picture of the premises and it's got the occupier's name written on it.
It's not really about the name, it's more about the key dates. So that's probably more of a commercial issue. So if a tenant is in a building, then it's going to advertise the fact that that tenant's in the building. But what wouldn't be advertised would be the terms of the lease that tenant occupies that building. So that's the sort of more confidential element rather than the fact that that tenant exists and occupies the space.
Councillor Lindsay.
Can I propose then that we do that follow the officer's suggestion, that we, as long as we don't refer to the details of when the lease expires and the weighted average lease time, that we have it in public? Because I do think that the public kind of just, I don't think there's anything wrong with what we're deciding, and I think it's good that the public should know what we do, so I agree with Councillor Parker.
Chair, just to clarify, that is absolutely fine if we stay in the open session. We just the warning that if you do stray into that, we will need to go into closed at that point.
Right, would you like to continue? Anyone else with a question? Councillor Davis.
Yeah, just for my own clarification. So we're now in a public session, but the section regarding the tenants' information will be redacted from the papers.
Chair, through you, the papers will not be in the public domain. You're just going to be talking around everything else apart from those tenants' details. So they will not go into the public domain. That the actual public interest test has been undertaken and it has been decided that the interest in keeping them confidential is above the public interest in publishing them, so we will keep them unpublished.
So does anyone have any questions or matters they want to discuss? We're still in open session. Councillor Ward.
I don't really want to ask any questions. I just want to state from my own personal view is that I know we've had a lot of criticism in the public and press, and most of it fairly ill-founded, that we're concentrating on retail property. But it's quite clear from what we've got here in these reports is that that retail percentage has never been as high as people imagine it was. And indeed, we are looking to rebalance as we invest further funds and focus more on office accommodation and industrial units, so that we already have a reasonably balanced portfolio, and that will only get better as time goes by. And this report gives us the confidence that that's going to happen. So from my point of view, it's got everything in that I'd like to see for the strategy for the future.
Councillor McCraw.
Madam Chair, it just occurs to me, normally this sort of thing comes out in the course of the meeting, but we are broadcasting this on YouTube, and the members of the public have asked questions about it. The press, as has been pointed out by Councillor Ward, have been following this. I wonder if it would be helpful if a brief summary of the highlights of the performance and the highlights of the key performance indicators for the business plan could be introduced for the benefit of members and for the benefit of the public. We have the Managing Director of CIFCO here with us, who probably knows as much about it as any other person in the room. And I think it would be useful to have that information in the public domain. And obviously, with it being Emily, she'll know exactly what she can say that should be in the public domain, because I think those pointers need to be made public. I would wonder if that could be done.
Afterwards to speak. Our Chief Executive wants to comment on this.
So just thought it might be useful to clarify for anyone who might be under any sense of confusion. The pink papers, as so-called, are the confidential elements. The majority, pages 25 through to pages 42, are in the public domain, and they do cover some of, without re-reviewing them, I'm not sure they will cover necessarily all of, but they certainly cover certainly most of those questions that I think you've just raised. So a lot of the content that you're asking to be in the public domain is in the public domain. If there are any other components that members feel that they would like to see in the public domain and subject to the advice in terms of confidentiality, they can be put in the public domain, then of course we would be able to do so. But I just want to reassure members that all that stuff on the white papers is in the public domain already, including performance data, including yield data, including details of what properties we own through CIFCO, and so on and so forth.
My point was, though, that could it be here stated for the record and for broadcast, as a matter of informing the public, by Emily, if that's possible. That just seems to me a reasonable way to explain ourselves.
Emily.
Hello. Yes, I'm happy to summarise. So the paper that is on the open agenda does set out CIFCO's performance against its key performance indicators. So the first key performance indicator was the yield. The target was a 6% yield. The net equivalent, the net initial yield that the portfolio has achieved is 5.75%, with an equivalent yield of just shy of 6%. So in effect, that target has broadly been met. There has been discussion about that yield, and I think one of the challenges and important aspects of creating a property portfolio is to ensure that we get the right portfolio. So potentially we could have achieved that 6% net initial yield, but that would have meant that we had a riskier portfolio overall. The second key performance indicator was in relation to completing the acquisition phase. The target was to complete that in January. It was actually completed in March. So again, I think it's a similar situation. I think we have met that key performance indicator within a reasonable tolerance, and that again, it was better to perhaps be couple of months behind that and buy the right assets rather than buying assets just to meet that deadline. So I think we have a more secure portfolio. The third KPI within the last year's business plan was in relation to interest rates being charged between the council and the trading company, and actually looked at a target date of September 19, so we've not actually met that date yet. However, we are now also moving into a second phase of investment, and so the suggestion is that it's not appropriate to be meeting that key performance indicator at this point in time, that we need to complete the second phase of acquisitions. So that's the performance indicators. The rest of the report really outlines some of the key details about some of the additional properties that have been acquired, and there is a lot of the detail from the business plan actually in that paper to ensure that the public has as much access to data as is possible without getting into confidential territory. The other aspect of the report really is just to confirm that this is an income fund, so the purpose of CIFCO is to generate income for the councils, and that with the first phase of investment now completed, it is generating an income of approximately 1.4 million across the two authorities, so that's obviously a very positive aspect. It does also highlight within the public paper that CIFCO has made a loss, a financial loss, and the reasons for the financial loss are because of the costs of acquiring the property, so stamp duty fees, so the set-up costs effectively, and also a small fluctuation in property values, which are largely related to the retail assets within the portfolio. But again, the paper goes on to say that that is a sort of reasonable tolerance for revaluations, and something that we should sort of expect on an annual basis to see fluctuations in value either upwards or downwards depending on the market. Does that provide enough of a summary?
Councillor McCraw.
Thank you very much, Emily. A couple of points I'd just like to bring out. When you say that the portfolio value has been reduced, but the value of the portfolio, as I understand it, is not a primary concern. CIFCO repay the council, is this correct, at a fixed rate, and the purpose of CIFCO's investments, please correct me if I'm wrong, is to provide an income. Okay, now when we examine properties, how many properties do we examine, and what proportion do we end up actually purchasing? I mean, what's the proportion?
The exact figures are in the report, but I can't remember them off the top of my head, although Councillor Busby can. But we do look at a significantly larger number of properties than the ones that we actually acquire. So over the last 12 months, we acquired 6 properties. We've probably looked at 70 or 80 properties and discounted most of those and made offers on, I think, possibly 10 or 12. So there is quite a large sifting process that goes through. Our fund managers and acquisition agents, Jones Lang LaSalle, also pre-sift. So before we get the sort of 70 or 80 properties that come through to us, Jones Lang LaSalle are also sifting through potentially hundreds of properties to see whether they meet our criteria before we even look at them. So it's a very kind of detailed sifting process that is undertaken, and certainly not one that's unlikely.
Councillor Busby, did you have something to add there?
At page 31, 10.4 is I think it's the paragraph that gives you the information. It says we could consider the assets, 77 assets. We rejected 64, submitted offers on 13 and acquired 6. I mean, I think that probably gives you all the information that you need to know. And I guess the reason for not hitting the KPIs was that we were more interested in perhaps in security than making a quick buck. And I hope that will continue. We want to make this as secure as possible for the council, And if it means that we miss out on a few properties, then that's too bad. If we only get 5.8% yield instead of 6%, that's still a good return. The most important thing on here is the security of the assets that we acquire.
Thank you. Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you. It strikes me that we haven't got any information on the average cost of borrowing. We've got a KPI for the yield, but if we're having to borrow, and which is 5.75 now, if we're having to borrow in the future, we might have to borrow at more than that. If there's a Brexit disaster, bond market falls through the floor, interest rates soar, suddenly we might not be able to borrow. So I wonder why there's no KPI for the differential between, because that's surely what we need to be aiming at, is getting a higher return than what we're borrowing at.
Emily, are you able to answer this?
So the tables that are at 10.1 set out the council's position, and effectively what you've got there is you've got the income that's being received from CIFCO and the cost of borrowing, so it then shows the net figure. So then that's the 1.4 million that we've talked about, that's the net figure. So that's the net income to the councils after their borrowing costs. Does that help with that question?
Well, it was really, not really, because that gives an absolute amount, but I'm talking about going forwards. Surely we need to have a mind to, when we're setting goals for the board to invest, we need to have a mind to what we can borrow at, as well as what the return might be. Percentage-wise.
So in part, that's what the net initial yield sets out. So we have a target for the yield. So the council's borrowing rates are significantly below that. So council borrowing rates are more likely to be in the order of 2% as opposed to our net initial yield at a sort of target of 5 3/4. So there is already a gap there. The net initial yield is reviewed on an annual basis, our target or our KPI. So we can obviously continue to review that, and it will need to reflect interest rates. And there is normally a relationship between those two in any event, so we would continue to review that. But at this point in time, we believe that the sort of 5 3/4% target yield is appropriate and reflects the sort of current borrowing rates that or interest rates that we're exposed to.
Councillor Hardacre.
Oh yeah, press the button. I noticed something in the appendix. On page 48 of the appendix, in the UK investment market, it says, within the retail sector, standard shops are expected to deliver the strongest return over the next 5 years, averaging 4.4% per annum. But the evidence of my eyes and ears tells me that shops and high streets are closing down record rate. So those two things in my mind don't quite go together. So I'm quite curious where that come from, forecast.
So I'd just like to pass that question on to Neville Pritchard. So Neville is a director at Jones Lang LaSalle and probably wrote that commentary within the business plan, so he's probably best placed to answer that query.
Good evening, Chair, ladies and gentlemen. As far as the various sectors are concerned, then retail has had a torrid time recently, and looking along the high streets, as you rightly say, it's tough out there. We all know that. The sense going forward is that it has hit a very low point. It is not going to bounce back very swiftly, but as far as the rents are concerned, then rents have dropped significantly from where they were. In many cases, a lot of occupiers are still paying the rents which were set a long time ago because contractually they're due to do that. But on new lettings, the rents have come down considerably, and they are starting to get to a level where they are starting to show a little bit of growth coming forward off the very, very low bases. Now, it's going to take time to come through. We do think it's going to be a matter of 5 years or so before we see a lot of uptick from there. And in the meantime, as we've projected, we think that the industrial sector in particular and some of the alternative sectors are going to be the best performers over the next few years. Nothing lasts forever. One of the reasons for getting a spread across the portfolio to the different sectors is that when one element is down, another element starts to come back, and vice versa. And so, like any set of investments, it's good to spread the risk between a variety of different sectors. What we tried to ensure is that in each sector, we've selected assets which do offer a good long-term income stream to a strong tenant as far as possible in locations which are sound and which offer good potential going forwards. I think it's right to say that if you look at some of the smaller towns and some of the weaker ends of the pitch, then they could never come back. They could be down for a long time. In the stronger locations and the better towns, then we feel that there are some positives to come through, but it will be a few years before we get there.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Yeah, just a quick one to allay Councillor Lindsay's fears about interest rates. I was at the LGA conference a couple of weeks ago, and we had a presentation from Mark Carney, and it's his view that in the major economies in the world, the interest rates are on a downward trend at the moment. So, but we have a while before we need to worry too much about our borrowing rate.
Any further comments or questions before we go to the vote? We're still in the open session. Did anyone want to go to the closed session for anything further? Otherwise, I think we're ready to go to the vote. The recommendations are on page 25. There are two recommendations, and we'll take them both together. So, all those in favour of the recommendations 3.1 and 3.2. Could you, those in favour, please?
Point of order, Madam Chair. Have we had a proposer and seconder? We have. My apologies. Back up again then.
So, this is in favour of point 3.1 and 2.
That's fine.
Thank you. Those against? No, carried. Thank you. So, I think we've now come to the end of our agenda today. I'd just like to remind you that the date of the next meeting is Tuesday, 24th September, with a different time, as I mentioned earlier, 6 p.m. for the next meeting in September. So I now close the meeting. Thank you very much.